for hopping on today and spending a little bit of your time with me. Today, we're going to be going over conference season debrief. I know there's probably some more conferences going on. We were lucky enough to attend several this year. And I got to say, nothing has gotten me more excited than the just pure energy and networking opportunities that we were able to have and experience while we were out at some of these conferences. And if you were there at ITC or WSIA or Target Markets or one of the many going on this year, you know exactly what I mean. I think everybody's been looking forward to seeing each other again, and it was just absolutely amazing. So I wanted to put together this webinar, which I'm hopefully not going to take up too much of your time. There's so much cool stuff to talk about. So I wanted to hit some of the highlights of things that I personally noticed, some things that some conversations I've been having since then that have really stood out. And I'm hoping that after this brief webinar, we can get connected. So everybody who's joined here today, I'm going to send out an email also with a recording of this. So if you have to step away, don't feel bad. I'll make sure I get this recording to you. Also, I hope you connect with me afterwards. So if there are things that I missed, things that you agree with, disagree with, let's have some conversations about it, because there's certainly a lot of noise. There's a lot of stuff going on, and it's kind of easy to get lost in all the momentum as this industry is rapidly changing. So today is all about, again, conference season debrief, some of the trends and the future of Insurtech. I think it's very timely, considering a lot of us are trying to prepare for next year, whether that is budgets or trying to get creative about how we can use our technology. So I'm going to go through that today. A quick side note before we hop into this: you should have a side panel where you can ask questions. I've got that up on one of my screens here, so I'm going to be constantly checking that out. If anybody has any questions, thoughts as I'm going through things, don't feel like you have to wait until the very end. Feel free to put that in there, and I'll address those as they come up. I won't be able to unmute everybody. Everyone's going to be muted throughout this webinar just to keep things easy. So that's your best way of communicating with me so we can get kind of a conversation going. So without further ado, let's hop right into it. There's a lot going on, and as Appulate's Director of Business Development, I'm always trying to find better ways to work with our partners who are traditionally MGAs, carriers, wholesalers, PEOs, and how they can interact with agents in a much more efficient way. But that really opens up a full conversation about what does that exactly mean? Appulate, of course, we've got our thing that we do, but there's so much more out there that we want to connect with, different partnerships, whether they're strategic partnerships with other software vendors, or frankly, just interesting ways that carriers have worked with vendors that I'm looking for better ways to connect to. So without further ado, let's get right into it before I keep talking too much about how excited I am. So what stood out to me? Of course, there was a lot, but I narrowed it down to, I think, 4 things that really stood out that are changing the industry and what we're seeing moving forward, especially into next year. And that to me was artificial intelligence, APIs, automation, and analytics. I'll call it the 4 A's just because I thought that was pretty clever. But let me kind of read what's on this slide here, and we're going to unpack some of this, and I'm going to take each one of these and discuss a little bit more about why I thought these are important. I'll start with this quote here by Insurtech Digital. Insurtechs can provide much needed innovation for traditional insurers who do not have these capabilities themselves due to the nature of their infrastructure. Of course, we've all seen it. We have these legacy systems. It's been very difficult to move things once you've invested in a certain level of technology. But what we're seeing is a lot of companies, and not just MGAs and carriers, but other third-party companies and vendors, who are coming up with really creative ways to supplement the technology that's already there, and not necessarily replace that. So as it continues, many traditional players are now looking to these startups because they not only offer cutting edge technology, but also innovative business models, since they often develop more cost-effective solutions than incumbents do. I think we can all agree with that. Again, this is high level. We're going to jump into some of these a little deeper here in a second. Also, something that stood out to me is workflows are in a dire need for digitization across the board. I haven't come across anybody who's just like, yep, we totally got it figured out, everything's perfect. There's always somewhere where there's a lack of digitization, and there's likely a startup or seven that are trying to solve those problems. Um, Love this quote here by A.com. Insurers and private equity firms are investing in insurtechs that improve business efficiency and penetrate new markets by creating fresh approaches to traditional insurance activities. At the same time, today's customers expect the same seamless, personalized digital experiences around insurance that they get from other service providers. These heightened customer expectations are pushing insurers to embrace new technologies and customer-centric business models. I couldn't have said that better myself. I absolutely see this every day. Appulate is so much more concerned, not necessarily with the customer to ensure interaction, but more of the agent to ensure interaction, which we also see this develop as well, where agents are kind of stuck in this limbo between trying to offer really good service to their insureds, but are having bad interactions with many of their markets, especially with legacy systems and carriers and various portals and all kinds of forms and documents that need to be completed that aren't necessarily standardized. It takes a ton of time. And then they meet a company that has really digitized that whole process and made it seamless. And they go, well, I don't know if I want to work with anybody else unless they're set up like this. And we're seeing a drastic shift in how agents are preferring to do business, how they're interacting with their markets, and then of course how they're kind of setting up themselves internally for success with their technology as well. In fact, over the last few years, and we'll get to this in a little bit, but I love to study the agents that use our platform. We have hundreds of thousands, and what a cool opportunity to gather a bunch of really cool data. One of the things we've noticed over the years, a few years ago, about 70 to 75% of agents had embraced some kind of agency management system. And that has grown to about 90% as of last year, which is phenomenal. But now they've got their data there. We're looking for ways to either connect to where they've got that data directly in their management system, or be able to bridge that over to a system like ours or someone else's where they can immediately interact with their markets. And so that's something that we've seen a lot of. I'll call it Verta4. They definitely have put a lot into that as well. And later on, I've got some other names I'm gonna throw out there as well. But let's unpack this, because that's a lot of information, and of course a couple really cool quotes. But what does this actually mean? So let's start with artificial intelligence. I find this to be a really interesting piece of Insurtech that it kind of gets thrown around like APIs, and I'll unpack that as well. But people talk about artificial intelligence, and maybe you've seen how that applies in a few of these places, but I narrowed it down to, I think, 6 major spots where artificial intelligence seems to really be trending in a very positive kind of way. So I'll start with claims adjudication. So in the US, property insurance, for example, the rate adjusters get injured about 4 times more often than construction workers. That's some data that I pulled up, which I honestly was pretty surprised by. And an example of a use case for artificial intelligence in that situation may be a property adjuster using drones that are equipped with computer vision technology in order to assess roof damage more effectively and provide an estimation of repair cost to the owner. So you don't have to have someone literally going up on a roof. And it's an example of something like that we're seeing companies that are really focused on artificial intelligence and using some of this technology to not just keep their people safe, but to get a much more accurate view of claims and diagnosing what are those issues. OCR, I'll hop to the next one here on the left. This is something that Appulate started doing about 17 years ago. Everywhere you turn, we've got some kind of OCR that's being implemented, whether that's, of course, with a core intake or forms, like application forms, or it may just be like driver's licenses and things like this. So just being able to scan those kind of documents, pull the characters off of it, and then feed that into your system in some kind of way is massive. And I think that took off extremely quickly, of course, especially over the last 5 years or so, and dramatically shifted how people think about data input. So instead of having to hire offshore resources or have somebody internally who's sitting there typing things in, if you can literally click a button and have that data flow, it's a much better experience. Of course, I'm sure there are folks on this call that may work at MGAs, carriers, or other third-party companies that can see a huge benefit for that, but also on the customer level, this is huge. So most of these points, and one of the reasons why I picked out these 6 is because it obviously benefits the market, but also benefits the customer experience. And when we can implement these kinds of things, they have a much better experience. And like I mentioned earlier about agents, you're able to retain those relationships, give them the tools for success that they need, and you're going to keep them around a lot longer. Underwriting accuracy, better underwriting accuracy for sure. This might be one of the biggest ones. Maybe that's just me, I'm biased a bit. I tend to focus on that quite a lot. So once you've got that data in, what can you do with it? What kind of underwriting experience can you give agents or the insured? In fact, I'm going to pull up some data here. It turns out about underwriting time is saved by about 10 times when you're implementing some kind of artificial intelligence, and can improve case acceptance by about 25%. So these are studies that are showing how positive the impact can actually be on just simple AI that's implemented in some of these processes. Many insurance processes or products require more complex underwriting, and an example of this might include software that determines cybersecurity needs. I've had some really great conversations with companies like Cowbell or AtBay, who've implemented some tools where maybe they talk to a customer and they have them download a software, and that software checks their firewalls and determines, hey, how at risk are you really? And not just selling them an insurance policy, but also giving them some tools to be safer and more protected. And we see that with other lines of business as well. I talked to, I can't remember the company's name, but a flood insurance company, and we see this with a bunch of them where they've implemented sensors and different things that can immediately give real-time information to that carrier or to the customer to let them know, hey, there's an issue, let's get this fixed right away. So that's really important. Claims processing, I'll hop up to the top right here. So as we know, this is kind of a largely paper-based, rarely end-to-end digitized. Some parts tend to be digitized, other parts still tend to be paper or completely paper. And the claims management process turns out can eat up about 50 to 80% of premiums revenues. So this is not something that can be ignored. This is a massive part of everybody's normal workflow that could be very quickly and changed and made much more efficiently. Claims processing also is prone to errors and inefficiencies, which can drive up the insurer's operating costs. So with AI, AI is great at finding patterns and finding things that are outliers. So if there are claims, I mean, this is so much easier to detect things like fraud. And in fact, that's the next one here. I think that kind of goes hand in hand. But what I pulled up here recently, American insurance companies lose over about 40 billion annually to fraudsters. So implementing AI isn't just to, I guess, collect data or to make the process a little faster, but also as they're putting through that information, checking the information to making sure it's correct or making sure that no fraud is occurring. I've seen some really cool companies out there. Plank kind of comes up in mind, which scours the internet, checks Google, maybe their websites, different things like this, to basically deliver a score and say, all right, they said they didn't do delivery, but right on their website, it offers delivery options. So we're gonna have to give them a low score on the input information. And maybe that was just a mistake that was very simple. Someone checked no instead of yes, but it's little things like that that can make a really big difference. The last one here that I'll get into a little bit is the competitive premiums and customer retention. Later on, I've got some survey results I'm going to get into, and always the number one answer to what an agent wants from a market, and I'm sure this is also the same for insureds as well, is competitive rates and quotes. So when implementing API in certain processes like this, it's going to mean better predictive costs and analysis on the front end and the back end for claims. An example might be driver performance monitoring. I know we've seen that quite a bit using telematics to push data to the market or to the insured so they can see, hey, here's how you're driving, here's how you're actually doing, here's what we suggest. And that helps kind of everybody. Real-time support. And actually, we're talking about driving. One of the stats that stood out to me as I was looking this up actually the other night, about 44% of car crash fatalities could have been prevented if EMS had real-time info on car crashes. So we're not talking about just firewalls and little floods inside of the house. I mean, these are people's lives at stake. Getting good information out there and using some of this artificial intelligence to monitor and assess damages right away can make a big difference for people's lives. So that's some of the stuff that I pulled up with artificial intelligence. Of course, any of these, you could probably spend a full hour talking about it. These are just some examples. And of course, this is just really high level, some things that I noticed in some conversations that I've had recently. And again, please connect with me. If you're a company that delivers solutions like this, you can tell I get pretty excited about it. So please contact me. I'd love to hear about what you guys do. So let's get into APIs. This is also something that has been a hot topic for a long time. If you're not familiar with what an API is, go to my YouTube. I did a nice video and I'll put a link at the end so you can check that out on what an API is, unpacking that even further, and how those get implemented. But basically, an API is really just essentially a data bridge. So you're building a data bridge between two places. And with Appulate, for example, I may have an agent go into our system. They answer some questions that a market may require. We send that data over. A good example might be a VIN number. And we send that VIN number over to the market. The market has got a database, or they're pulling from somewhere else vehicle information that comes back to where that user is typing in that information, and essentially in a matter of seconds, and in some cases truly a real-time experience, all of that data gets populated right within the system. And we can use these APIs to hit back-end systems to deliver rates or appetite indications. This is massive because of course, yeah, there's the speed. Again, that's wonderful. Agents by far want speed more than anything. But one of the things that has kind of happened as a result of this is kind of a change in how agents interact with markets, how they're investigating products, and maybe even shopping for new markets or products and folks to work with. And what I mean by that is if I can instantly get good information and have full transparency, I don't have to go back and forth with an underwriter for days on end, answering a bunch of questions that may or may not result in me getting a quote. If I can get this information right up front, I can better service my insured. Maybe the insured wants to also have this experience directly with you as well. It's just much better to have that kind of level of transparency. And again, everything I want to try to back up with some kind of data. It's not about just things being fast and cool. It makes a big impact. So the top line here, I put some stats based on what we've seen personally and the impact that it's had on markets who deliver APIs within our system. About 140% average agent new market selection, huge. We see about on average a 245% increase in submission activity, which is massive through our system, which you could look at as kind of like a digital distribution platform. But this average new market selection, this is what I was just talking about. When agents go into our system, they're matching risk to appetite. They're getting this information back very, very quickly. And it more often than not results in new appointments or checking out a new market by 140%. That's huge. They're 2 times more likely to bind on an insurance platform when they've got an API that they can work with. We see about a 25 to 45% bind ratio on average. I think, again, this has a lot to do with just having transparency up front. As they're inputting that information, they say, oh, wow, it's accepted. It looks good to me. The price looks good. Let's move forward. And so that really helps. You're also filtering out a lot of noise. We also see about a 31% agency appointment request compound annual growth rate. So again, getting agents appointed, getting the right kind of agents appointed, that's also a whole other thing. And this is where transparency can really come into play. If you've got an agent who spends a lot of time writing certain kinds of risks and they're looking for a particular type of market, it's so much easier to be able to go into a platform like Appulate or one of the many other distribution platforms out there that are interacting with APIs so that they can find a better fit for what they're trying to do, rather than a market that they may send to every now and then as kind of a fallback. They want to work with better partners, and I think that that's what agents, MGAs and wholesalers and carriers want as well. Also, last year, our best net new performer um, gained about $70 million in net new premium just as a result of delivering an API on our system. Before that, they weren't seeing a lot of activity. They put that out there, saw a huge number of agents interacting with that, and made a bunch of money from it. APIs are going to allow a major cut down on communication time, underwriting work, and here's what's interesting, also IT costs. So down below, I've got some kind of reasons for this. So first of all, security. So a small amount of data is transferred during an API call. So this is stuff that you can control and configure. This is really nice, and a really important piece of this industry is to keep data secure. Connectivity, you can connect multiple systems seamlessly. That's a big one. There's a number of companies out there who are really focused on just that. I think people are moving away from kind of all-in-one systems. They'd rather have even 5 or 10 systems that all do a really dedicated piece of the process, and they're really good at it, but they want everything to talk to each other. My example earlier, where we send out a VIN number and we get information back. There could be 3 systems that are operating behind the scenes, but we may be communicating with a single API to deliver that information back and forth. And so that is something that's possible. Once you make that API, you can then send that out to folks like Appulate or 10 other companies that want to be able to use that API, and you can keep it in a standardized way so that developers can work with it, have a good experience every time. It doesn't have to be changed wildly, and it just makes things a lot easier instead of traditionally where we've had to work with somebody and build in the whole thing and constantly maintain it, constantly change it. It becomes very costly and difficult. Distribution, of course, I'm going to talk about distribution quite a bit. That's a big piece of this. Once you are able to just kind of build it once and deliver that API out to different digital distribution partners, your ROI expands exponentially. And control. Everybody wants to be able to have control over their whole process, right? I mean, if you've got a rater on your backend system, you may want to be able to change those rates on any given day. You may want to change them based on weather activities or different things that may be happening. And you can have your technology be doing all of this in real time and maintain control in your backend system so that it reflects in real time with a company like Appulate, for example. And of course, all of this does is increases a better user experience for everybody, not just your employees, but of course for agents and their insureds as well. So I'm gonna keep moving forward here. Again, if you have any questions or thoughts, feel free to not hesitate. Add that to the side panel. I'm constantly checking that out. So I mentioned ROI, and I'd love to get into this a little bit more. Again, I found some really cool information here. Automation, like what we're discussing, could reduce the cost of a claims journey by as much as 30%. That's huge. And AI and machine learning can replace over $1 trillion of the current financial services cost structure, which largely, by the way, is actual employees. So if you think about it, spending a certain amount of money every single time you've got someone offshore inputting data every single time manually, not only does that take forever, even if they're very quick, but it's expensive and it could be solved with a click of a button. Even those offshore resources now are not just doing manual entry, they're also implementing this technology. So they're making their processes a lot faster. They're using things like OCR, and then you're paying them for that. So if you can implement some of these technologies right away on the front end, you don't have to deal with all of those different processes. You can have it be as seamless as possible right there on the front end. I've done some calculations, and I'm going to get into a little bit more of how I put this together here in a second. But if you only save about an hour of time, which could be very easy to do, even just with something like OCR, you save about $3,000 for every 100 submissions. at a minimum. I try to be pretty conservative with that. And surprisingly, that's the number that came up. I think it could be higher than that. In fact, I've seen it go higher than that, and some ROIs that we've calculated with partners of ours have certainly come up to be pretty surprising. Most insurance markets can double their submissions by distributing on an insurance platform. I think I mentioned that earlier, and I'll unpack how I came up with those numbers as we kind of dive into this a little further. So, why are analytics such a big deal? I mentioned analytics as part of the kind of the 4 A's, and I was going to call this data, 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 because it seemed like everywhere I turned, people were talking about data. How can we get data? What kind of data is best? There are companies that all they do is pull data. Well, better data can mean a couple things. I think from a high level, first of all, it means better predictions. We talked about this earlier in the impact that can have, and of course the cut down on communication time, underwriting work, and overall IT cost with APIs pulling that data is important. But newer technology has advanced to the point where data is collected in such new ways that it may seem a little intrusive, and I think to some degree, but we've talked about how important that can be. So using data from, instead of let's say like a database of just, all right, here's their address, here's some general information about where they're located, but real-time information about, is it actually flooding? How often is it flooding? What is the weather predictions like? Coming straight from the source, and even using online informations like through websites, Google, social media. I mentioned telematics earlier, smart devices. This just means more accurate, quicker data and a better understanding of that risk. So of course you can have better underwriting accuracy. Provide better customer experiences. I think this is probably going to come up on every slide, to be honest. So if I'm being repetitive, I apologize, but this is such a big deal, right? So tailoring the customer experience with better data not only just means better speed, but better accuracy for them, more complete profiles, custom pricing and options, as well as overall better customer service. And what I mean by better customer service, for example, something that kind of came up that was really interesting, and I don't think I have this on my notes here, but when I was reading about this, a good example was a company, I can't remember their name, but they implemented a really cool thing on their website that says, hey, here's when most people are calling in. This is when most people have the kind of issues that they have, and assessing when does this take place so that they could hire the right kind of resources at the right time. So even their call centers could be a better experience. They could have enough people there to answer the phone at those peak times, and the right kind of person is going to answer the phone with the right kind of experience to handle those certain kinds of questions. So again, just implementing something like that can have a really big effect on that customer experience and likely their decision with moving with you in the future. So we've got a couple other quotes there. I'll let you guys read those, and I'll also send this out so you can check that out. But this is what everybody seems to be talking about, and this makes a big difference. So do agents really use the technology? I mentioned earlier about 90% of agents use an agency management system. I've got that here. It's not just my numbers, which I've pulled the same exact numbers, but also other industry studies are showing the same kind of data, which is really exciting, because it's one thing to put a bunch of money into this, get excited about it, implement all this technology, but then nobody uses it. That's a problem. So agents are using it. Not only are they using it, they're preferring it. So if you're a market that hasn't implemented a certain level of technology, quite frankly, you're going to be left behind. And this isn't just kind of a salesy FOMO thing, because a lot of things we're talking about here, Appulate doesn't even do. But we're seeing this. I mean, for example, and I'll pull up a slide here. Well, I've got some data on this, but we've seen agents actually move away from carriers and start to prefer working with MGAs, and not just because I think they're specialized, but the types of MGAs they're moving towards are digital. They're providing a better experience overall. Carriers who are doing this now are absolutely seeing a rise in submission activities, but the ones who aren't have been calling me saying, what's going on? Where are all my submissions? Why aren't agents submitting to me? What am I doing wrong here? Once we get into their workflow, we find out exactly what it is. And it usually is something that was overlooked, where they said, well, hey, we have them fill out this application, they put all the information in, they email it, our underwriter takes a look at it, we get back to them, and we do that pretty quickly. But all of that, what they mean by pretty quickly, usually is a day or so, at least. And in these situations where we can implement at least some basic AI during the questionnaire process, or give them a better, more transparent experience up front with their appetite indication, that's what they're looking for. That's instant. It's so incredibly quick, and frankly about 10 times faster than that other option that they have. And so they're losing submissions because of things like that. In fact, 86% of agents say digital technology is vital to helping their agency grow. So not just a preference, not something, again, they just think is cool, but something that is vital to operating their company. 76% of agents feel they're not getting the most out of their digital technology. This could also be just the agency management systems that they're using. A good example of this is they're putting all their data in their agency management system. They like their agency management system, but then they still have to fill out some other form to submit to a carrier. So what's the point? This is where Appulate likes to step in, and we try to bridge that data across. It's very cool, but that allows agents to better use the technology that they have. When we can empower agents in that way, we see them stick around, we see them get excited, and we see them invest more in the technology and work with more digital focused markets. In fact, they find that they can increase their sales funnel by about 20 to 30% with better technology utilization. That's, of course, agents. I also see this with wholesalers, with MGAs, who are focused on drawing in more volume, but may not have the same kind of bandwidth or employee resources that a larger company may have. I've got companies on our platform that have 3 people working there that are doing just as much volume as some of the larger carriers on our platform, and they're doing it just as efficiently, and they're not working on the weekends either. They're just using the technology to do the bulk of this work, filtering out bad submissions. Everything they receive is qualified and complete, and now they can process a quote, or maybe the system has already done it for them. So things like that can make a huge difference. So let's keep moving forward, because I got a bunch of cool stuff on here. So I mentioned surveys earlier, and we're actually about to conduct one right now. I think we just sent out our first email. Every single year, we love to conduct these surveys. We've got about 300,000 agents on our platform. So again, I don't know a bigger pool of agents that we can tap into in the industry. So we're very lucky to have that. And we gather a lot of really, really interesting information about not just what agents want from their markets, which we're going to get into here, but how this trends. What are agents doing differently this year than they were doing last year? What are they investing in? What are they looking for? What kind of lines of business are they writing? How did they hear about a product? What's working, what's not working, that sort of thing. So to kind of come through this really quickly, on the left was our results from 2021. On the right was our results from 2022. The reason I pull this up is because I want you to see just an example of some of the trends that I've looked at, and how things have kind of changed over the years. So one of the things that really stood out, of course, instant quotes, competitive rates, fast quote turnaround, always top 3. That hasn't changed much year to year. But what has changed are things like better commission, which went from 4th to 9th on this chart, which you don't really see the big difference in that until I tell you that the response was 8 to 1. 8 to 1. And we're not talking about a couple hundred people that responded to this. We're talking about tens of thousands. So when agents are thinking about, all right, what's important to me, but they do realize that time is money, and they're missing out, even if they're making better commission, if it's taking them 10 times longer to submit to you. It seems obvious, and it is becoming very, very obvious, but that's what they're responding, and this is how this is coming across to us. And so we've got to focus on things like that. Of course, shorter questionnaires, always great, but if we can do a shorter questionnaire using something like AI, or like in our case, we can use APIs, or we can build it into our system so that Even if a market or an agent has selected 10 different markets and they all ask the same question just a little differently, 10 different ways, we're not going to ask it 10 different ways. We're going to ask it one way. We're going to try to standardize that process. We're going to cut out all the fat. I can't tell you how many times a carrier or an MGA sends me their proprietary intake form with hundreds of questions and 10 pages worth of information that they've got to complete. And each page has got different sections for restaurants or construction or whatever it may be. And each one of those has a pocket of 10, 15 different questions. And an agent's just got to figure that out. They have to just kind of know or have that relationship. And that requires a certain level of expertise that, frankly, a lot of times when a company's hiring somebody, that hire may not have. They don't have that long experience and 20 years in the business and a lengthy relationship with a carrier. Maybe they want to work with a new market and now it's all new anyway. So when we can implement this in a platform, for example, we can make the questionnaire shorter so that when they do say, hey, the class code is a restaurant, now we're asking them restaurant questions. We're not asking them anything else. They can keep exactly focused on the meat of what needs to be done, and they can convey that to the insured essentially in real time. So that cuts down on a lot of time. Supplemental forms, proprietary forms are essentially becoming a thing of the past. And one of the things that agents say they actually hate the most when they're working with markets, they're so frustrated with it because they may have that data already. Now they have to type it in again, and you're not the only market that they're trying to do that with. So it causes a lot of problems, and they don't even know if you're going to write it at the end of the day. A core data intake, no manual entry. We hit OCR earlier. That's really important. Agents are recognizing that. That showed up for the first time in 2021 as the 10th place. Now that's moved up to 6th. I think this is also a result of not just Appulate implementing things like this, because largely a lot of the folks we did survey weren't even really that familiar with Appulate, just to be completely honest. So we didn't get biased results here. We really tried to hit as many agents as possible, even ones who don't use our system frequently, and it was consistent because there are other systems out there that have implemented this kind of technology. When I can just upload it in a core form and it pulls the data off and I don't have to type it in, that makes my life a lot easier if I'm an agent. Access multiple markets on a single platform, that's been showing up a lot. The next slide I have is actually, and I'll actually jump to it because of course there's other cool stuff here, but I think this is where I want to end that. 65% of agents preferred a distribution platform last time we surveyed them. So that is huge. And I'm going to place a bet that as we're conducting the survey, we're going to have some results, I think, early to mid-January. I'll probably do another webinar on that and get really excited about all the results. And I'm going to compare a lot of these slides that we're looking at right now and see how those trends were affected either way. So here you go. There's our results now. If it changes negatively, I'll be wrong. My guess is this is going to move up to closer to like 75% or more, because quite frankly, this has become a really big deal for a lot of agents and a lot of the systems that they're using. I mentioned Vertafore earlier, which has, I think, like a 30% industry penetration of agent users. That's how they're implementing new technology. They're not only are they acquiring companies that are doing things like this, but the carriers they're working with are implementing APIs directly on their platform. You can think of a company like Expedia or Kayak, where instead of going to 10 different airlines websites to find out who's got the best rate on a flight to Chicago, well, you can pick all 10 of them right there and you can see all of their rates right away, as well as what time they leave and all of the other details. That's a much better experience for the user. And, you know, can you imagine going to Expedia and you have 10 different airlines here, but then you don't have one, Southwest isn't on there? Well, you're likely probably not even going to buy a ticket from Southwest because they're just not there. You'd probably prefer, even if it costs a little bit more, just to be able to take care of it right in that spot. And we're seeing the same thing with agents across the board. Another really cool pie chart I wanted to pull up here. And again, we're going to take a look at this and assess this here in a couple months. But how agents find markets to work with turned out to be extremely interesting, right? So again, I make a big argument that how markets are set up makes a big difference. And I think this supplements this conversation in a really unique kind of way. So of course we see referrals. That's the biggest one on here at 23.7%. Networking was also big at about 23%. So those were equally Huge events and conferences was about 9.3%, so that was big as well. But I don't know if those are necessarily surprising, as well as they found me. All right, so these aren't necessarily the most surprising. What was really interesting, I thought, was the numbers that came from things like social media and search engines, which were 5.8% and 9.6% respectively, and how that connected to or compared to quote rating systems or even Appulate, which scored in its own category about a point higher than social media. So if you've got a marketing team that's got a social media budget, or you're working with one of the many marketing companies out there that are saying, hey, you've got to put more money into this. There's a lot of agents are using things like LinkedIn and Twitter or whatever else to learn about trends and different markets and what they're doing. Yes, that's absolutely the case. But as you can imagine, if I can, instead of just going on social media and saying, hey, we've got a new auto product in Indiana. Okay, very cool. But what does that actually mean? Are we talking about trucking and taxis, or what is this? Well, when they can go on a system like Appulate or a quote rating system and immediately get information about how this risk matches that appetite and what the nuances of the product details are, now they're more likely to actually move forward, and they're more likely to find you and work with you that way. So that was really interesting. Quote rating systems was about 9.5%, about equal to search engines. So anytime that you have got something that stands up against Google, for example, that's significant. In fact, quote rating system, we scored at about 70% of the responses in there alone as well. So I got to brag on Appulate. But this was really interesting. I've got a lot of really good information on this. Again, would love to connect with you if you want to hear more about this and how we came up with these numbers and what we learned. Happy to go into that. I'm not going to read all of this either, but I wanted to put this up there. I've already touched on a couple of these, like agents value automated process over commission 8-to-1. Agents actually valued a core to ingestion nearly twice as much compared to previous years. So when I said it moved from 10th to 6th, again, it just doesn't really paint the picture as well as knowing some of the details of what that actually looked like and how those responses were. It was significant. So here's, we talked through some of these things already. Please feel free to check that out. A lot of really good information here. So let's move on to workflow automation. I think this was the last A of the 4 A's was automation. A lot of that we've already talked about is automation in general. But I'd love to talk a little bit about what role Appulate plays as kind of an example of how we've reacted to this and how we can automate some of these processes, kind of what we're looking forward to next year, and not just solving these issues, but addressing them kind of proactively. Appulate's been around for a long time. We've been doing this for nearly about 17 years. In the Insurtech space, that's pretty mature. So we're very excited to have stuck around through all of the noise and stayed very consistent. We constantly have about a 40% annual growth rate, and we see about 20,000 monthly submissions processing through our system a month. We manage 100% of Accord forms. We actually connect, or we're compatible with every single agency management system out there. We've now covered every major line and a lot of interesting lines of business right within our system. It's already ready out of the box, and we've connected to over 150 policy admin systems through our system as well. So you can look at Appulate as kind of this bridge, or what I like to call a submission management system, where agents by the hundreds of thousands go into our system, move data from their agency management system, interact with the market's questionnaire, appetite, real-time indications and information about that appetite, or even rates, and then have a full rate quote bind experience for many of our carrier partners, or at a very least be able to submit to that market, return back a quote right within our system, or we can send that agent outside of our system into yours with all of their data and single sign-on, so that they can immediately have a better experience right within your workflow. And here's kind of a diagram of what I just explained. So again, they're moving that data that they already have, where they've already got it. We're connecting to it, and we want to connect to you to make your technology a lot more efficient. That's our goal. And we don't do this just alone, by the way. There's a number of companies that we've partnered with out there. There's a lot of companies in Insurtech that use our technology to supplement what they do. So please feel free to connect with me. I mean, there's a really good chance that we may have worked together, talked together, or we have some mutual partnerships in some kind of way. That's just kind of how things are starting to go, and have gone for a while. So I wanted to bring this slide up. This is really interesting. There's a lot of information here. I'm not going to read all of this either, but we see a clear rise in ROI depending on what kind of technology is embraced. And we've gone through a lot of the different types of technology that can be embraced. There's a number of things on the back end that you could turn on, or APIs you could connect to, or processes that you could implement, or even other partnerships that you could have that would make our experience together much more sophisticated. At the very least, on the far left, we call A to X, which is our OCR technology. We use OCR. We also can extract data directly from an agency management system, or in a Accord form that's fillable. This eliminates all manual entry, right? So that's the least automated out of this, and even that is pretty amazing, and makes a huge difference. But then when we can kind of compound that with other technology like the Appetite engine, we talked about this earlier, and how we can filter out some of the submissions or give transparency into the product in real time, that makes a big difference. Once we start connecting to APIs, and we've got a much more digital process in different kinds of integrations with your backend systems or other providers who may be pushing in data, rates, or whatever it may be. A guide wire, for example, is a really good example of these next two, where we can connect to a system like that, and offer a lot of really good experiences for the agents right within our system. That makes a big difference. And then, of course, at the very end here, we've got distribution. Not everybody's interested in distribution, but if you are, again, we've got 300,000 users. I would struggle to find a bigger pool of agents. In fact, out of that, I think we have about 116,000 of those agents who are subscribed and want to hear about new products and programs in our platform. I'll call out the Insurance Business Association. I think that's the publication. They're the biggest one in the industry. They are wonderful. Everything that they do, I get really impressed by it. Their audience is similar to ours. So even just compared to a company that specifically just puts out information, we run on par with them as far as agents subscribing and being interested in what you're doing, and it's right in a place where they've got their data and already ready to submit to you. So that's what really gets exciting in our platform, and it's a totally different way of thinking about distribution. I mentioned earlier, I have some calculations, and by the way, this is my final slide of this information. I've got some links after this and some information to throw out at you. But real quick, let's hit this. So how much time can automation actually save? So based on some estimations and an average salary of about $60,000 per year per underwriter, which we know that's pretty conservative. If we do 100 submissions a month, and we can save 2.5 hours, and think about all the back and forth time of diagnosing whether or not a risk meets your criteria, like trying to actually type things into a back end system, moving things around, and then of course actually putting together a quote and sending that out. I think that's at least 2.5 hours, probably a lot more. But if even we save 2.5 hours of that whole process for an underwriter per month, per underwriter, that's about 250 hours and about $84,000 a year in savings, just in the quoting process alone. Just imagine, you're also implementing some of this technology on the back end side, claims processing, bill pay, whatever that may be. This just compounds significantly. So those costs of all these fancy Insurtechs that you see out there, and what it takes to kind of get on board, it can be a little shocking sometimes. But I think paying attention to the actual ROI on this is extremely important, and it's sometimes hard to put numbers behind that. So I'd be happy to dig into this and how this could actually impact you, because this can fluctuate depending on how you use it. For example, that bottom part here, if you're a wholesaler, for example, and you've got 30 different carriers you're working with, and every one of those we can auto-populate their portal, so you're not having to do that. I easily could go to 10 different carriers in the time it could take you to go to one, and I assess about $17,000 annually in savings per carrier, per back-end system that we're able to integrate with. So that's pretty significant. And our costs aren't that high, by the way. I'd like to say that because I don't look at this and go, then I need to charge about $84,000 for every underwriter they have. It's not even close to that. So I'd say that our entire cost for everything that we do, including distribution and all of our resources, if you were going to take it to the max, is probably the average salary of a really good marketing person or an underwriter. So if that gives you just kind of an idea, and that's on average. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more, just depends on how complex and how creative we need to get. So I'll end it there because, again, this is just meant to be some high level information, some really interesting stuff that I found. I threw some links on here. These are clickable, so I'll send this full document out to everybody so you can check this out. A lot of great articles out there with people who have similar views, different views than me, but a lot of really cool stuff going on in the industry right now for sure. So I hope you check that out. And again, if you've got any questions for me or you want to reach out, I love having conversations about this. So please take up some time on my calendar. Let's have a discussion. Maybe we can find a way to work together and disrupt the industry a little bit more. But I really appreciate everybody's time. I've got a few more minutes here. If there are any other questions that anybody has, please feel free to put that up here. Otherwise, I just appreciate you so much for sticking around and being on this conversation here. So looks like I got a question. What are some other companies that have stood out to you? It's a good question. Recently, we partnered with a company called Intelligence. I'm going to try to say that the best way I can. I guess it's intelligence, but agents as part of that word. I love what they're doing. So they've basically created a single API that we could interact with, but on the back end side, if you want to call it that, they can connect to so many different kinds of APIs and backend systems. And so this allows for faster connectivity to systems like ours. So if you have a backend system, you're not really sure how to maybe even put together an API, or you're having issues with it, or maybe you have 10 different APIs that you're trying to connect to, and a company like us goes, oh my God, that's wild. That's going to be very difficult for us to manage. A company like this makes that a lot easier for us to integrate, and I think that's going to create a lot less friction when trying to navigate the space. SmartPay comes up. I had a really good conversation with a couple folks from SmartPay at the conference. I really like what they're doing with bill pay and a lot of pay-as-you-go options. I want to do a quick shout out to those folks, so reach out to them if you're looking for billing automation. Also IPFS, we've partnered with IPFS. We haven't yet partnered with SmartPay, I'll say that. I mean, I'm trying to be as unbiased as possible here, but a lot of really cool companies out there that are really implementing some neat things. I think I mentioned Plank earlier. Check out Plank, Planck. We're working on ways to partner with them. I think what they're doing is really, really cool. I'll let them kind of describe what they do, but they're in the business of data, that's for sure. And so some of the tools that they have to get the data that you need are very, very impressive. We also have partnered with a company called Insurtech. Check out Insurtech, great backend processing software there as well. So I think those are some of the ones I kind of wrote down a few minutes before I hopped on here. Those are some of the ones that really stood out to me, but good question. Are there any other questions that are coming to mind? I'll give you guys a couple minutes here to put some on there. All right, awesome. That must mean that I covered it pretty well, I hope. So anyways, guys, hey, thank you so much. I hope you have a really good and successful week. I hope everybody gets a chance to get some rest in R&R with the holiday seasons coming up. Please reach out to me. Let's certainly connect. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks.